Probably should have brought my own calendar to put it up in front. Good afternoon again. House Transportation Committee is reconvening at 3:20 here. This is going to be 20 minutes at the most. We'll see where it goes. Committee discussion pieces around a whole number of things that we're going to go kind of hit on. But first thing I want to make sure we're lining up on timeline. If you look at your calendar here, that we're the week of the 17th here in February. And so we have this week's agenda, which I mentioned is primarily T-bill language and accountability. We talked about getting the T-bill across the finish line. Then we're here next week. Next week's going to be a big chunk of public transportation. The final report came out related to public transportation. We have not had Green Mountain Transit in yet. There's a number of, and we haven't had another provider. There's the entire large report, both from Green Mountain Transit had one report. And then there was the agency consultant that reported, but we had a preliminary report we were working on. Now the final report came out the 15th. Now it's time for Green Mountain Transit to come in. It's time for the final report update. And there are changes going on within public transit. We're not solving that here today. I just wanted you to know that's where we're going next week. This week, we already talked about through T-bill language. It's clear we need to bring in the other side on some of these sections. We're going to have that working over the next couple of weeks. Go ahead if you want to, Representative.
I was just going to say, there is a bill coming out. It's been late because Damien has been ill. Realized that with Cindy proposals to consider for the T-bill.
Excellent. That's where we're headed in terms of the timeline. Is we have this week that's booked on accountability and T-bill language, and next week's got Green Mountain Transit and continue to work on the language. Then we're off for a week. And then the deadline comes to the March 14th and potentially up to the 21st. But I'd like you all to know that the speaker has asked several times, and we can meet with the speaker every week, and we'll meet with her again. Although she is also gone home with that same illness that's going around. So it'll probably be a Zoom meeting today at best. She's asked if the committee has any chance that the bill will be done sooner than the normal prescribed piece. Since the T-bills at this point, its current stage is only X long and the money is at X spot. So I want you to be aware that we didn't make any commitments on that other than we have been asked at our multiple meetings whether we could possibly help her for the schedule of, or help the House. I don't know what the right way to say that is. For planning purposes, that might the T-bill come out a little earlier than normal. Representative.
I know we have, because we're a money committee till March 21st, but I think we will try to get it out the same week as the policy.
We have a couple years.
Yeah, the last couple of years, just because they need our information to plug into approach. So
that is the piece. We come back from town meeting, and then that would be that week of up to the 14th. And traditionally, we've tried to get it out then. There has been asked if we would get it out, continue to work to get it out early. That does limit our time frame. I want you to be aware of, I didn't create conflicting times or agendas, and neither did people that are looking to bring things in. That wasn't, some of this was beyond their, certainly beyond their control. I was complaining offline about a bill that I've 6 weeks for and whatnot. So I get it. There's a lot of issues there. That was, so the timeline there is where we're coming through. And I mentioned we are hitting the public transit. We're not debating that today, but that's, we got to get the information piece. There is a public transit piece to potentially for the T-bill or not. And we are have to bring in the other pieces of the T-bill here. Then we have, of course, this bigger picture about revenue. We'll have the CFO of the agency back in again and highway director in again, and summarizing where we're projecting for federal money over the next X number of years. We've taken testimony on at least 3-4 different revenue sources, which all have their possible dead ends and troubles. But the whole discussion that we as a committee have around transportation revenues, and to our colleagues to make sure they understand the seriousness of the situation, that continues to brew. I don't know how that impacts the T-bill or where we're headed, but it is not changing. And there is discussion either where new revenue may or may not come from, but also where the revenue that we do have leaves. And we are working on the whole issue around the JDOT transfer. And there's other discussions going on.
Any progress on that or discussions or?
I would think the, sort of this,
Reminds me of
the misconception of the corporations committee had and just straightened
Yeah.
out, so. I have an understanding of our need of it and what will happen, if we don't get it, but, you know, there's still no guarantees, but I think we're all on the same page as, us.
Understand.
Yeah, understanding
Yeah.
the need for a committee, so, you know, they have a lot bigger things on their plate too, so.
And we have to draft a letter of response to appropriations based on their letter, which I summarize as saying, what's your number one priority? I think that we have talked about our number one priority is to protect that transfer from not happening. We don't want the money to leave the transportation fund to go to public safety, or however that is actually termed, but that's where that is. That's our priority number one in the budget. Without that, we're looking at significant cutbacks in the white book. We'll receive testimony on those potential cutbacks.
Yeah, no, and I guess I would just add too, is we might want to do a 1A as far as just stating the fact of our declining revenue, specifically obviously gas and the uprise in the purchase and use projection and where that, obviously, a third of that goes and the impact that has on our, obviously our budget. And hopefully Candace will give us the updated gap analysis that we're having in the out years of the 30 to 40 million dollars, is what I say.
No. We have two.
Oh, yeah. No. So, yeah, so I mean, I think if we really hit home the importance of obviously the projection of the gas tax, the purchase use, obviously they're going in different directions, and then the third of that going is, I think needs to be in that letter, whether or not that anything happens with it, but I think that probably statement
Wow.
needs to be said.
I mean, it's sort of like, here's what we want, okay.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like,
Well, I guess I'm asking for the committee, wherever the possibility of the discussion, whatever context of the building, is that the concern for the transportation revenues is our biggest job
Yeah.
here in transportation, unless somebody wants to come up with a different agreement or a different understanding of where it's headed. And I don't want to go back to constituents or anywhere that says we're going to be cutting back on our amount of infrastructure spending or activity. Going backwards is not something. So I'm looking to everybody in the committee to understand how the money flows and what we've been looking at for new monies and what we need to protect the transportation funds. I encourage you to talk to Logan in the JFO if you have any misunderstandings of it or you want additional information about the money. He is our available resource financially, but we've been through a number of it, and he's coming back in multiple times between now and finishing the T-bill, but that's my biggest piece, and that's the direction of the letter. Or any other feedback, please go ahead.
So just recalling that Representative McCoy mentioned earlier that we also have money that's going into the education fund.
That's the purchase, that's what I was referring to.
Oh, is that the JFL?
There's-
No, purchase use.
Yes, you collect all of the money through the DMV, through the gasoline tax, through the sale of motor vehicles, then 6% of it comes into the transportation fund of all the car sales. But then 1/3 of that car sales revenue goes over to help pay for education and property taxes. The history being on a loose level that X number of years ago, transportation had 65 more million gallons of gas being burned than they did right now. Expenses were a whole lot less. Things were a very different picture. They said, oh, we'll take some money to help the education fund. And then the state police were in a phase of disrepair or falling apart vehicles and a real mess for them. So they said, well, transportation's tangentially tied to the state police. We'll go ahead and grab that money and send it over to public safety, state police cars and everything else. And so we can take that money and help prop up education. Well, now, regardless of how education money is spent, the revenue on education continues to be on an upward trend. And I'm not arguing that, but expenses is a different issue, but the revenue is on an upward track. And the transportation fund is flat at best. And now we don't have any money. We need our money back or some other way.
I'm just suggesting that maybe our we broaden our number one priority to say, we want to keep all of our money in transportation, not just JTOC, but also the purchase and sale, the piece of that that's going to education.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I was sort of dancing around. I don't know what she had once, we want it on black, because it's not gonna happen. I think we just make our case laid out.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Negotiate from there.
yeah.
I'm making that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think raising awareness that there's, I have been surprised, a lot of people do not even know this. And, it points to the challenge in our unsustainably unaffordable education system. So, I honestly, as we are talking about reforming it, I think it's helpful for people to know everything's a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
And, we've got tremendous infrastructure needs and the resiliency and all of that. And, so we've got a lot on our plate.
Yeah.
Without arguing education, except that it is the number one priority in the building, I would love for everybody to make sure that at least all of our colleagues understand they're taking $50 million out of transportation to help subsidize, or whatever the right word is, to help pay for education. They're taking, we all, whatever.
Yeah.
We also take $20 million previously to this year's recommend, and it's happened often, $20 million to go to public safety. But yes, that number is about 50 million, maybe a little bit less this year. But it's growing because the amount of car sales, the value of cars is up. That is a growing piece of revenue. And 50 million approximately goes over to help with education out of transportation revenues. They're not mine, they're transportation revenues. And 20 million goes out to pay for the state police. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I should have started off right from the very beginning about how excited we are to have you back in
Yeah.
committee. And, but then when I tried to do that, each of the sections we started up on, you weren't here. And then we come back, and then I'd already started with the next person, and then
I wasn't sure how this committee could even get by without insurance of the candies, so, yeah.
I noticed it's empty. I do have another one that.
Just don't tell Patty what we did to public transit in the T-bill yet.
Yeah.
And I saved Rail Trail specifically to when you came back.
Jared said, we've held off on the rail trail and the Green Mountain Transit until you came back.
Want to feel the love.
I think the 50 million and what we give to education, if it's ever going to happen, it's this year, because this is the year of the complete overhaul of how we're funding and delivering education. So this is the time, and I think we really do have to harp on that and say, you're redoing it now, you're restructuring how we're going to pay for it. So restructure knowing that 50 million, you're not going to have 50 million from ed. And you're not gonna, in public safety, is you're gonna have 20 million from transportation. So I think this is the time to do it.
And I agree, this is the time to do that. And I think we also need to work toward the mileage-based user fee, because, I can defend EVs all day long, but I can't defend us not paying that. And to find out, hey, we're not gonna even know whether we can get to a point of it unless we get this grant, and I'm not sure we can count on it. So I wouldn't mind having some language in there and identify where the funds could come. If we don't get the grant, we still go forward with it, so that, when we can bring those in, ideally an index fund, so that, one, we sort of can push EVs with a straight face, because now it's getting harder to, if they're not paying their fair share. And that's a market that we know is going to grow. We don't know how fast, but we want to make sure we capture that sooner than later, rather than, now it's a year and a half and could go farther. So wouldn't mind doing that. And the other thing on the additional revenues is I'd like us to at least take a good look at that delivery fee. And what I've been saying is, hey, those fees ideally could go to the municipalities that are getting hit from the impact. from all those trucks, you know, on the roads, but that's sort of that's all I have to say.
So just remind me, did we put a increased registration fee on EVs last year, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do we
Yeah.
know how much that's generating or?
Well, that's one of the ones we have to revisit, but that money goes directly to ACCD for more chargers.
Right.
It doesn't come to
Yeah,
transportation fee.
Right, it's
So
sort of a
We're gonna have
temporary
them come
thing.
in and test it, right?
They were banking around 600,000.
Yes,
600.
But they
Yeah.
overlooked it.
it's not on the schedule yet, but it's on the, I'm sorry, I'm having two different,
Yeah.
it's on the to-do list of pieces, but it's
Yeah.
not on there yet, but it is an issue that what Representative Burke's referring to is whether that transfer is happening and whether that money is being implemented and whatnot, but it's being collected.
Just started in
It's
January.
just on the first of the year, and then there's been some piece about that, so we have to.
Okay.
I don't know if, I can't describe what nature of that issue is, but it is being collected, it is directed, or it's been directed to go towards.
Oh, it's gonna have a minimal effect on our bottom line.
It's not gonna help transportation at this point.
To, having a line item for, say,
Taking a rate on
800,000 to EV chargers.
Right,
And-
We're taking and using this money. Okay.
I'm not looking to
Yeah.
argue that,
And-
you hear all the time that additional charging is one of the needed
Yeah.
pieces for the continued EV
the
adoption.
the legislation, yeah, I would say, you know, I think it's a good thing because that's probably the one thing that really is holding back a lot of people from, you know, getting a lower cost vehicle going forward. But the legislation says once the mileage-based user fee starts, that thing goes away. Yeah. That's-
And then the money goes back in.
Then it goes to
Into
the
the
T.
front. Okay. Right.
There is,
You know, I'm still was unclear about what the federal dollars had to be for that, for the that would delay if we didn't get it, we would delay the mileage-based user fee. Why did we?
the agency applied for a grant and was given it. It started from 3 years ago or more to get the funds to implement a mileage-based user fee. To work with the
$3
DMV
million
to
to,
put it together through the programming, to set up a system that doesn't exist today, to collect that money, to somehow track those vehicles and that usage and to make that happen. And what Representative Pouch was suggesting is that if we're not going to get that money freed up, that we either put something in the bill that says where to get it or ask them to go find so that we can move forward, that the 18 months doesn't become 36.
Right.
I guess I'm always amazed how much money state can spend on things that I think should be relatively inexpensive.
Oh, I'm right with you.
Systems
Yeah.
are already in place.
You should have.
Well, I could use that
50+ million. You put it
I could use that logic with a lot of things in my own personal
I-
life. I can't defend that. I just know that that's
Yeah.
one of the things that we're at.
I did ask JFO, you know, if this took us $3.5 million, let's say, get there, because we're not getting, if we don't get the grant. He thought, you know, within the first year, we would get about 5 million. So within a year, we could recover it, although you'd have to pay it now and get it later. But, you know, I think we should look at that and maybe put some language in that keeps the ball rolling.
I know you had your hand up. I don't know if you want to, no, that covered it. I thought, I was like, I think I can answer this one. You know, I'm still using that excuse that if I'd have known I was gonna be sitting here, I'd have paid better attention the last couple of years.
Who put the trains in?
Well, that was one thing you missed. Representative Burke got a wonderful letter from a former representative that,
Herb Russell
Oh, Herb
contacted me and he had these trains on
Really?
the bus. They're sort of vintage.
Yeah, that's what I definitely,
Transit bus
yeah, but that one, right?
and he's anyway, I think that
He's
he's,
in New Jersey, is he still?
I think it's Delaware.
Delaware? Yeah.
He's also sending something else.
Oh.
Amtrak, what did he say this? A poster of an Amtrak visit Vermont, something like that.
It's a good spot for it out there.
Patty, we were unsure how old they were, and we said, well,
Let's
what
David
do you think?
I think he's,
it was nice. Representative,
Just a question for Representative Pouch on the, okay, the fee, so the MBUF, weren't they saying, so they were talking today that we didn't get $3 million federal grant, so we haven't figured out this
3+,
program. But wasn't there also discussion about problem with the software, that they wouldn't be ready to like register the
no,
cars
I
with the
think-
VIN, or am I conflating two different issues?
Yeah.
Please, if you're willing,
Okay.
unless you already got this.
Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. So I think what Patrick was describing for you was because of our DMV modernization and the modernization of our inspection station collection of the odometer reading, we will be able to program the now new or about to be finished registration system, and which is sort of the payment collection side of things, to receive data from the inspection side of the equipment. And so those two systems will talk to each other. We'll have a verification system. And then in the payment side where registrations, licenses, et cetera, live, there will be a module which will be for you to pay your registration fee. And probably at the outset, you would be estimating the miles you drive each year, so you could prepay if you wanted to, versus getting a big bill at the end of the year. And that idea is to make sure we have an affordable pathway for all Vermonters who may be paying the gas tax as you go now. Was there another part of that question?
So the system there, if we were trying to do this 5 years ago, forget it.
Yeah, we could.
Now it's there, but it is gonna take some programming and whatnot. That's where the $3.5 million comes in.
Yeah, and a significant amount of the 3.5 million is also for the public education and outreach campaign, so that we can contact all the EV owners and they know what's coming, and so the bases are all covered. It's not a big surprise, and there'll be some anticipation answering of questions. And we are trying to determine, working with Agency of Digital Services, if we can get that number down at all. Because if we have to go a different pathway for the funding, we may not be able to find as much funding as what's awarded to us, but it may not be given to us by the federal government, so.
Thank you.
There's a couple different pieces that I want to throw back. Representative Powers was talking about the charging or revenue generated from an EV on a road and whatnot, and about an EV paying its fair share, I think is what you said. And I know we took testimony on the gas tax or the gas assessment. In some ways, now with the mileage-based user fee being bumped back, some of the discussion about the idea that, yes, electric vehicles are now paying their fair share. And because of the testimony that we're paying the lowest amount of money we've ever paid in gas tax since 1928 as a state, that perhaps another penny or two, along with also charging electric vehicles, is something that we could have walked together potentially, and that was being discussed. But if you don't have one, it's pretty hard to have the other, but that is a dialogue that I want to at least have you in the back of your minds, that that penny that costs $10 to a high user for the year, when you could say to tell that same constituents that the electric cars are paying more, but that kind of stymies us with the mileage-based user fee being delayed and the idea of a gas tax. Yes, the electric vehicles are now paying, and we're going to have to pay a little more because we're in effect, we're not paying at a level that we haven't paid in almost 100 years, over 100 years since gas tax is the lowest percentage of cost to a Vermonter than it's ever been. So that conversation is much harder to have in this situation about a potential gas tax increase or assessment fee. The last thing, since we're hitting close to the time, I have mentioned it a number of times to everybody. I don't know if I mentioned everybody, but we have, of course, Town Highway Aid Program, and we have Town Highway Class 2 roadway program, and we have Town Highway Structures. Town Highway Aid Program currently has in effect a inflation consumer price index / comparison to a T fund revenue increase that is tied so that there is some growth in the Town Highway Aid Program. Town Highway Class 2 road program is a defined exact specific dollar amount, and so is Town Highway Structures, a specific dollar figure. Although we bumped them last year, this year's budget now has them back to the statutory required number. We know that their expenses in the town, all our municipalities, continue to go up. If we're flat funding and expenses go up, it's the same problem we have on our bigger picture of T funds being flat and expenses going up. I am working with Legislative Council and JFO to put in some language potentially that would say we need to tie those to some level of growth moving forward. I don't think we can come this late in the game and say that what could potentially be, $1 million or some number, which JFO is going to present to us, that we have to fix it for this T fund, but we should try to be able to fix the structure so that they know when they build their budget for next year, meaning the agency is building their budget for next year, that number is now going to be increased by some level of CPI or some level of tie to the transportation funds. I'm looking for support across the committee that I'd like to do what's done, what was called the Quimby rule, perhaps to do to the other pieces. I don't think town highway bridges follows the same logic. That's much more project specifically driven, I believe. And anyway, I'm queuing that up. I don't think that we can change it I don't think it's a wise idea to try to change and rearrange the whole budget for this year, but to try to get it in place so that we can go back to our colleagues on the floor and say we are at least helping in some way to the town. Whether we could get in this direction of saving some of that sales and use tax, whether we could save on or put that retail delivery fee to the towns. This is another way to look that we might be able to help, or at least set up the future of helping towns in the future. But it does take away money that's not in the state's hands to work on projects. So, but I'd still think that planning it in advance and protecting that portion is important. Representative Burke?
I agree with you. Are you saying that the money for this year is less than we did last year?
I'm saying that
That's what it is, right? Yeah.
we raised it last year to 8 million and to 8.8, and they're back to their numbers.
Yeah.
So it's down $1 million over last year. But I am not saying that I'm ready to go try to rewrite the white book to find $1 million. But I would prefer that if we raise it, that it doesn't go backwards again.
But even if we put that inflationary provision in for the next time, then it's still not going to catch up to what it was last year.
Well, I guess I would say that if you're interested in some dialogue and having around that, I'm on the
I mean,
idea.
I'm interested in what's a reasonable thing to do. I mean, we have needs at the state system and needs at the town system, and they're, equivalent. I mean,
And-
if everybody's using the roads, you're on a town highway and then you're on a state highway. There's no,
And my stronger argument for it, for both the state and the towns is, I think our towns need to build up their infrastructure because of climate change. So we saw this year, all these small towns, they get hit pretty hard, and, we can't rely on FEMA to get us back, because it still costs the towns money. And it's, over the long run, I say it costs more. If they don't have a little bit of a way to invest in some resilience.
We had this system in place for class 2 roadways for this year, for town highway 8. We were, would have been around 258,000. Just to give you a ballpark.
Would have been 258, the other one was 858,000. Last one there. So we have a little more time, and I guess people are expecting we're gonna adjourn at 3:45, but we can normally the vice chair and I are leaving at this point, but we've been stood up for a few minutes, postponed, so we could go a little further, but please, Representative Burke.
I just got a notice about the event in the Pavilion Building on Thursday. It's called Mobilizing for Vermont's Extreme Weather. It's a group that's putting out webinars. I attended one in the fall, I think, Building Resilience in Rural Communities series. These are panels that teach about, really effective ways to do that. So if anybody's interested, it's in the Pavilion Building on Thursday. Oh, it's not till Thursday, March 27th.
I've actually attended.
I like so focused on this week. Thursday, March 27th. I'll send out a notice later.
I've attended several of their webinars that were building up to this, in the idea of climate resiliency and how towns and the state are preparing for that, and of course, how you're going to pay for that, which is my biggest piece of all of that. On a ending note, I think, or we're getting close to, unless we can certainly continue to have the dialogue. we have permission from the speaker's office, and an invitation pending, that hasn't been fully pulled together, but our field trip is, gonna be on a Tuesday, and it's gonna be potentially, we'll all pull it together, but speaker's on board, the agency's got a big events planned, and we're potentially headed in that direction, northbound. All details to eventually be, how do they do that with the cliffhangers they used to have? You know, you
Just get your suntan lotion ready and a bathing suit.
I would, so